In today's video, I want to talk a little bit about violence, kind of in some general terms, but also kind of in light of this weekend's events of the third attempted assassination of President Donald Trump. And we live in very interesting times. There is an expression to never ask to live in interesting times. It's better to live in boring times. But the times we live in are the ones we live in. We don't get to go back. And even if you did, you'd probably find that most periods in history have their interesting moments. But it is very interesting that there's been three. This is the third attempt at assassinating President Donald Trump. Uh, Previously, when he was running for office, and now this as well. And it's just very concerning that there is this sentiment among many people on the left that political violence is not only okay, that it is warranted, that it should be celebrated. You see this not just with these attempts on the life of President Donald Trump, but with the death of Charlie Kirk, with I forget the name, uh, the CEO that was assassinated by. It's crazy that I know the name of the assassin, Luigi Mangione, in New York. Various other acts of political violence that all come from the left, and the left is more politically violent. It always has been. It always will be. And I'm actually my next video, the video that I've been working on for a while now, is kind of going to dive into why that is, the reason for that. That's not what this video is about, though. This is just kind of one that's probably going to be quicker because it's basically just talking about violence. Why, when is it appropriate, I guess, when is it not? When you look in history, you see that. So, in a previous video, I made about pacifism. Pacifism, I think, is evil. I think it's far more evil than general kind of overarching violence. I think that violence can be a tool for good or for evil. Pacifism, I think, is always evil. But if you're not supposed to be a pacifist, if that's evil, then when is violence appropriate? The Bible talks about violence on a kind of state level. Paul says the state doesn't wield the sword in vain. First Testament laws go all through about war and penalties for breaking various laws, up to and including the death penalty, those kinds of things. This is why I'm not pro-life. I don't. I used to use that term, but I've become an abolitionist now. Is the term that I prefer to use because I'm not pro-life in general terms. I don't. I do believe in the death penalty. I do believe that war is sometimes necessary. That violence is sometimes necessary. But the question is when. When is violence necessary? And you hear sometimes from different groups of people, they'll say things like, "Well, in the founding fathers, they went to war over like a fraction of a cent tax on tea, and we're way past that now." Or you'll hear people talk about the Civil War, and they call them, I think they're called Boogaloo Boys, basically guys who want there to be a second Civil War. And they say, well, the things that brought about the first Civil War, we've had even worse and more things than that. And it shows a lack of kind of understanding of historical context and of the realities of war and violence in general. And the answer is, when is violence appropriate? And it's when you've tried literally everything else. And we haven't tried everything else. And even looking at some other points in history, so going back to the first Civil War in America, it wasn't really a civil war, it was a revolution. The South wasn't looking to kind of overthrow the government of the North and institute something themselves. They were attempting to break away. Now, there was a lot of problems with the manner in which they went about that. They It was not like the American Revolution, where there was taxation without representation, and they had this king kind of imposing his will on them. They lost an election and got upset and then started a war. And this is the Democratic Party. It's the way they operate. They lose elections and they resort to violence. It's the same playbook. The Democrats have had this playbook from the beginning, looking at the Civil War, but even at other points in history, they've always resorted to violence. And part of it is because of who they kind of target to bring into their side, and various things along those lines. But again, I don't want to necessarily get into all of that right now. But it is just crazy, this disconnect that people have in the modern era from violence and the reality of it and what it really looks like and how it really works and when it's really necessary versus when it's not. And again, the answer is only after you've tried everything else. That even then, you should strive for avoiding it. And it's interesting because, I said pacifism is evil and we shouldn't be pacifists, but uh, that we should also not be violent. We should be as nonviolent as possible. The idea is like the matched aggression principle, that if someone tries to kill you, it's okay to defend yourself, but that you should not be the aggressor unless on an individual level, let's say. I think that states can kind of preemptively sometimes strike each other or things like that if they get information. Like if we had, looking at World War II, if there had been proper communications and all these things, and we had known that the bombing of Pearl Harbor was going to happen, and so we preemptively struck the Japanese, that would have been appropriate on a state level. This is one of the things that I kind of talked a little bit about in my video about how we got here, where I talked about the Victorian era and some of the things that have changed over the course of time. And one of those things is kind of the appropriateness of the different levels of action. And that the state level, for example, is meant to operate on a state versus state kind of thing. That if one nation invades you, that your nation should defend you. But when it comes down to like your own private life, defending yourself from criminals or those types of things, it actually should be incumbent upon you. That if I were king of the world, perfect world kind of thing that I could set up, vigilantism should not necessarily be a problem. That if someone aggresses you, you should be allowed to defend yourself fully. You should be allowed to take action against those who have wronged you. And some people say, well, what happens if that goes too far? What happens if that vigilante, do you kind of enacting justice yourself, taking justice into your own hands? What happens if that goes too far? That's always kind of the response that, oh, that can go too far. And you end up with like, a posse of people killing someone who's innocent and had nothing to do with it. And it's like, well, we have that anyway. What happens when the state goes too far? What happens when the police go too far? What happens when an innocent man gets put in prison? Um, there are recourses for that. Uh, tends to be that you call the police. If the police go too far, who do you call? You call other police. And so that same thing should happen, but we are so trained and ingrained to outsource everything. We outsource justice, we outsource education, we outsource family care and management, we outsource everything in our culture today and in our world today. And we've outsourced violence. And so, because of that, there is a disconnect, a distance that people have, and not just because we live in such an online kind of way that people are disconnected in that sense, that they don't see the real people involved. You have people who celebrated Charlie Kirk's murder because they didn't see him as a real person. To them, it was no different than if they were watching a movie and the villain in the movie gets killed, and you celebrate that when the villain in the movie dies. Well, to them, Charlie Kirk is their movie villain, and they are the movie hero. And so his death, they celebrated it. And it's because there's a disconnect between people and reality right now. And it is such a profound problem in our world today, this disconnect that people have with reality. And it's because we've outsourced everything. And for over 150, 200 years, we've been more and more kind of outsourcing reality and the necessary things. There are people who don't know where the food comes from in the supermarket. They think it just appears. And these are grown adults, not like children who don't know any better. These are grown adults who should know better, who don't know what a farm is. They're in planes flying over flyover country, as they call it, because they see no value in it. And yet, if it wasn't for that flyover country, and those farms, that when they look down, they're like, oh, that's a weird way. Why does the ground look like that? And it's because it's farms. And they don't know. They don't know what farmland looks like. They don't know what it looks like to take care of animals, to raise animals. They don't know what it's like to live in a place where you have to worry about a wolf coming and attacking your kid. And so you have to have a rifle on hand to literally fight off wolves. They don't understand these things. This is like people who are anti-gun. It's like they're not anti-gun. They just don't want you to have one because they don't know why you need one, because they live in a city. They have police within a few minutes of a call. But if you live out in the middle of nowhere, where the nearest law enforcement is 14, 15, an hour away, sometimes more, you have to be able to defend yourself. But these people will make laws making it impossible for you to defend yourself. And it really is that we live in this era of disconnection. between people. And it, again, this has been intentional for over 150, 200 years, that people have been chipping away at the connections people have, at the way that people used to live. There's an expression I have, I use it in a previous video, and it is that the law without justice is tyranny, but justice without the law is still justice. And this is something that I believe. This is something, again, if in a perfect world where we could, not even a perfect world, just a world that is not as bonkers as the world we live in today, this would be understood by people. We live in a system of a lot of laws, but very little justice. And when you have people who strive for justice, they're seen as the villains. When you have people who uh, try to promote justice and push justice, they're treated like they're the bad guys who try to promote things like meritocracy or these types of things that are all just systems. Um, Capitalism is more just than communism, uh, but if you have communists being elected, communism is one of the most evil ideologies that have ever existed. It killed more people in the 20th century than had died in the previous 20 centuries before that put together. It is the most violent, evil ideology that the world has ever created, because it's literally founded on theft. Communism is literally, it's rooted on stealing from other people. That you want what they have, you don't want to do what they did to get it, and so you take it. It is inherently violent. There is no way around this. Communism isn't something that's good in theory, but it's never been done right. No, it is evil in theory. It is theft. Uh, that's just what it is. And I talked about this in a previous video too. That World War II was not fascism of the Germans versus the liberal democracies of England and France and America. It was fascism versus communism, and the liberal democracies were caught in the middle, and we sided with the communists and we beat the fascists, and then we stopped. I agree with Patton. I think we should have kept going and taken out the communists as well. That But we allowed communism to fester, and it got into our institutions, and it pushed even more. And again, this was all kind of built off of things that came before them anyway, so it wasn't the root of the problem. It was just kind of the biggest branch of the problem. But when you have our university system, for example, that is entirely infiltrated in so many ways, not just our university systems, our public education system, in its inception, the way that it's designed is built off of these communist ideologies and the communist mythos, and that's what it promotes. And it is an inherently violent ideology, and then you wonder why people have gotten more and more okay with political violence and other types of violence. And yet, if you say that a man should be allowed to defend his family if someone breaks into his house, they call you the crazy person. They call you the one who's got the wrong idea. And it's just the times that we live in, and I don't know how you necessarily fix this on a structural level as an individual, right? Like, what can you do about this, because you still live in this society, in this system, so you can't necessarily enact justice the way that maybe you could have even 100 years ago. And this is one of the other interesting things, that people think that because we live in current year that we are the best. It's this presentism, this chronological snobbery of, we live in this year, 2026, and so we're the most advanced, we're the most furthest along, we're the best, and everything we do is the right way to do things. And there are things that people think that we've always done, that, oh, this is just the way it's always been, so this is the way that it should be. And it's like, no, this is the new way of doing things. You may have only known this because you grew up in it, but for all of human history it was done differently, and it was done better, and that's what got you where you are. And now you're undermining it, or you're propping up this other thing that other people use because they undermine that, and it just really builds this system of arrogance. And when you're arrogant, that leads to kind of a dismissiveness of other people, which then breeds a disconnect and a approval of violence against those people. If you think you're better than other people, then why would you care what happens to them? They're less than you, they're lesser than you. And this is something that you see in the political realm that we live in today. There's an expression that the right thinks the left is wrong, the left thinks the right is evil. And this is the case. Like, it reminds me of, I was at a Bible study, and we were talking about some various different things, and one of the things that came up was, living for Christ, right? Living out your faith and not compromising on certain things, like being honest about what the Bible says about homosexuality, being honest about what it says about various other topics. And the there were people who were talking about some things that compromising on some things. It's like, oh, I think it's okay to compromise on this. And one of the things I said was, listen, people who are not of God, people who are not with Christianity, people who do not have not submitted their life to Christ as their Lord and Savior and King, people who haven't done that, they're going to hate you anyway. Jesus said that. Jesus said, they hated me, they're going to hate you. It does not matter how much you compromise. Your enemies, they hate you. This even goes into, for example, my Islam video, that it doesn't matter whether you believe what they believe. It doesn't matter whether you accept what they accept. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the way they think, but have the respect for other people to believe them when they tell you things. So if Islam says they're allowed to lie, and Islam says they're in eternal jihad, and Islam says they need to conquer the world, then trust that the Muslims will try to do those things. Now, not every Muslim is as active as every other, but it's a similar thing for Christianity. There's this sense that, like, Christians, there's a weakness in modern Christianity that has kind of built up again over the past 200-ish years, and has been kind of forced in via all of these things. And again, I talk about it a bit in my long video about how we got here, but it really is this pernicious infiltration of not just Christianity, but of just justice and law and all these high principles that we used to have, like human rights and all these things that we developed over the course of time, and that we struggled through and we found our way through, and that Christians kind of led the charge in, just like we did the abolition of slavery, like, the all of these other things. Christianity is not weak. It's never supposed to have been, but it's not spread by the sword like something like Islam is, and so it's not an inherently violent thing, and so because of that, there's this sense that people have of it as not being as strong, and that sense kind of grew and metastasized and kind of festered. And now you have this very weak Christianity that kind of exists in certain parts of the world and in certain parts of America. And it's just kind of sad, honestly, that you have churches, for example, that won't even put uh, a anti-abortion sign outside their church because they don't want to offend members of their congregation. It's like, if someone's in your congregation and they get offended that you don't want to murder babies, that person is not of God. I'm sorry. If you're offended that murdering babies is wrong, then you're the problem. Yeah. So why are you compromising for those people? If you have people in your congregation who don't want you to go and speak out against homosexuality, who cares? They're the ones, they need to hear it more than anyone else. They need you to say, no, God has made it clear. Now, you can disagree with God, but do that and acknowledge that that's what you're doing. You're disagreeing with God. Um, and kind of went off on a little rabbit trail there, but ultimately, that kind of bravery that is needed. Um, and again, it's like, when is violence applicable? This is something that I've wondered about. This is something that some people online have been talking about. Like, when is that? And again, it's after you've tried everything else. Like right now, we still have all the mechanisms in place to not need violence from our side. The right does not need to get violent. We don't. We aren't. We are far less violent. And you'll see people lie about this. They'll say, "Oh, the right is more violent." It's because you think that white supremacists are right wing. Why? Why do you think that? It's because you are a liar and a bad person. Because no, the right wing is not white supremacists. In fact, mainstream right wing people kick those people out of their organizations. And now we know that the SPLC, a left wing organization, has been funding those types of people, has been funding the KKK and these other people. And 3 attempts to assassinate the president, all from left wing people. This is not, there is no equivalency to the violence that is inherent to the left wing, to communism, and which that is becoming the mainstream. The AOC was quoted, is put out a message saying that wanting to um, wanting to only allow citizens to vote is somehow racist. But there are people who think that, and it's because they are disconnected from reality. And this video's kind of been a little bit rambling, I guess. It's been like 2 weeks since I made a video, so I knew I just needed to make one. And with the assassination attempt of President Trump, again, a third one, and it just kind of, especially in light of my previous video about pacifism and how it's evil, it just really seemed like that was kind of the starting point, I guess, for this. Is that that their violence can be acceptable. It again, the state sanctioned violence. There is a lot of good conversations that can be had there, and it's where are we on the right? And I don't think we're in a place to be violent yet, but we do need to acknowledge that the left is violent. Mainstream leftists want to kill you if you're on the right. They celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. Mainstream. Um, you watch something like again, I mean, there's so many people, and you can see other people's videos, and they're not even right wing people, but they're classified as right wing now because everything is right wing that isn't far left communism these days. You have people like Joe Rogan and Tim Pool who get classified as right wing just because they're not left wing communists who want to steal other people's money. Like it, it's just insane to me that this is the time that we live in, but it is the time that we live in. So I'm just kind of gonna wrap it up there. Like I said, this was just something quick that I just wanted to kind of put out, just so I'd put out another video, and it doesn't go a whole another week or more before I do, because I want to try to always have at least one video a week if I can, and I do want to try to start making, maybe do two videos a week. I have some ideas for some potential kind of series about certain things. That's not what this video is about either. It's not about my plans for the future. Um, it is just about that idea of violence and how one of the reasons that the left wing in America, one of the reasons that violence is becoming so commonplace is because there's this general disconnect from reality and the consequences of it in the world today. Not in no small part because of how online everyone is. We're just going to end it there. Bit of a rambly video. Hopefully you got something good out of it. If you did like the video, if you didn't, you can dislike the video. You can comment below um, any thoughts that you have that pertain to this. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.